Let's face it, when it comes to pomp and pageantry, few do it as well as us British. And today it was on full display as Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth opened Parliament. For the 58th time, the Queen performed her duty of presenting a policy roadmap. But for the first time, it was a coalition government she was speaking before. The speech itself underlined Britain's economic problems and the need for painful cuts. The BBC's political editor Nick Robinson reports.
It's a journey she's made many times before. This was the 58th time Her Majesty has opened Parliament. But even she has never seen anything quite like this. Not one leader, but two, emerging from Downing Street to walk to the Commons to hear the plans of the first coalition since the war, read out by the monarch. Any new government hopes to begin its life with a fanfare. There was, though, one problem with today's Queen's speech. It had been leaked to the papers, so you didn't need to be the Prime Minister's wife to know what was going to be in it. What is still surprising, though, is the makeup of this new coalition. There's Baroness Margaret Thatcher, and there's Shirley Williams, united, as surely they never expected. Also unfamiliar, the sight of these two who will clash week in, week out. The Prime Minister will face Harriet Harman as leader of the opposition until Labour picks a new leader this autumn. Today wrote the script for many of their exchanges.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my government's legislative programme will be based upon the principles of freedom, fairness and responsibility. The first priority is to reduce the deficit and restore economic growth.
It's been 2 weeks exactly since David Cameron and Nick Clegg agreed to their political marriage. Today, their political order of service promised to free up the public services and to reform politics, delivering more academies and creating new so-called free schools in England, giving each police force a new elected official in England and Wales, and UK-wide introducing a cap on immigration and a referendum on a new voting system for the Commons.
Mr. Peter Lilly.
The first day of any new Parliament usually begins with light-hearted speeches from hand-picked government backbenchers. Today's, one from each of the two coalition partners, were more barbed. First, a former Tory minister wondered what to call his new political allies.
How about my honourable partner? The word partner nowadays implies an even greater degree of intimacy than friendship.
But soon he moved from a joke to a warning.
The dismay which many people feel about not getting what they thought they were voting for is a salutary warning about the dangers of coalitions.
And the oddness of it all was not lost on the Lib Dem who followed him.
I'm pleased to be sitting on these benches, but it is ironic that I started my parliamentary career by unseating a Tory and I now sit with them.
The Prime Minister and his deputy may look comfortable with each other. They've clearly a lot of work to do to make their parties feel the same. And Harriet Harman is keen to increase that discomfort.
While the happy couple are enjoying the thrill of the rose garden, the in-laws are saying that they're just not right for each other.
Labour, she said, would fight for the deficit to be reduced fairly and without damaging economic recovery.
Cancelling 40,000 jobs for young people under the Future Jobs Fund is not cutting waste, it's blighting their prospects. The country does face a very serious challenge to reduce our deficit. What the country needs to know is that the government will do so in a fair way.
The Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister welcomed her to her new role, but said that in her speech there was something missing.
Not one word of apology for the appalling mess that has been left in this country. Nothing to say about leaving Britain with a deficit that is bigger than Greece's. This Queen's speech marks an end to the years of recklessness and big government and the beginning of the years of responsibility and good government. It tackles the causes of our social problems. It means better schools for our children, real hope for those out of work, a stronger NHS for everyone.
Every policy announced today has had first to go through a process of reconciling the different parties' positions, leaving others to pick out what they like and what not.
I am quite keen to see doing away with ID cards, which are a costly mess and wasteful, but I'm not so keen on the whole idea of this welfare to work reform.
Returning home alone, David Cameron knows that today marked the end of the politics of Core Blimey and the beginning of business as usual.
And just after he filed that report, I spoke to Nick Robinson from Westminster about the challenges the government faces. Nick, we heard earlier in the programme about how markets fell around the world today, and much of the discussion here in America has been about Europe and its debt crisis and Britain and its debt crisis. Were the policies laid out by Her Majesty today for this new government the right policies to be tackling that kind of task? Is the government showing itself in this first day up to the job?
Well, the oddity about today is enormous amounts of ceremony, Catty. And then in addition, it's a list of the bills, the legislation that this new government will pass. But of course, the action that is required to deal with the deficit is not really about legislation. It's about the decisions taken by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, by Britain's Treasury Minister, to actually control spending and put up the budget. So today wasn't really the day. This week we have already seen this new coalition government, though, announce plans to cut £6 billion of spending in year. In other words, in this financial year. And we get an emergency budget on June the 22nd where there will be more detailed plans to increase taxes, and at the end of the year, in the fall at least, in the autumn, we will get more detail about a spending round for the next 3 years. What is striking, I think, is that the Conservatives, who always said cuts had to begin now, argued with those who are now their coalition partners, the Liberal Democrats, have won that argument, have won the argument that because of what's happening in the markets, because of what's happening in the Eurozone in particular, they had to be seen to look tough on public spending straight away, and that's what they've done.
So, Nick, what's your hunch after watching them there sitting next to each other today? Is this alliance a strong enough alliance to do what needs to be done? Can they get through these tough measures?
Well, what we know is it's strong at the top. We know it's strong at the next level, and we have, frankly, no idea how strong it will prove to be below that. In other words, the Prime Minister and his new deputy, David Cameron, leader of the Conservative Party, Nick Clegg of the Liberal Democrats, have struck it off. They seem very, very comfortable one with the other. And that as you go to the top ministers below them, they too seem very comfortable with one another. One Conservative saying to me, my Liberal Democrat opponent, now my friend, he is like a blood brother to me. He thinks like me, he acts like me. We are comfortable one with the other. And yet I am paid to sit in the gallery of that building behind me in the House of Commons, looking down on those people you don't see on all the television pictures, looking down at the backbenchers, the people without government jobs. And they don't look comfortable one tiny bit. And yet we've not even got to the stage where the really difficult decisions are being taken, when services are being cut, when jobs are being lost, when taxes are being increased. And the danger for this coalition government is not that they can't stick together around the cabinet table, but their parties start to conclude we're being damaged by this, we ought to break apart again. The one hope that I think they've got that this coalition will stick together is, in a sense, their shared knowledge that things are going to be mightily tough economically and politically, almost means that there's an incentive to stick together for the long term in the hope they get through the worst and get to better times.
Nick Robinson, extraordinary scenes in Parliament today, and I suspect many more to come with this coalition. Nick, thank you very much for joining us from Westminster.